Hey guys, I'm Micah.
And I'm Kendra.
And today we're going to be doing a devotional on Genesis chapter 46 through 50 on Jacob's blessing. And Kendra's going to start us off with a background.
Yeah, so basically I just wanted to kind of remind you guys of what happened before we reach chapter 46. And that is Joseph is currently in Egypt and he has been given all power and authority over Egypt. And he's been given power and authority over selling grain and food to people of all of the land or anyone that essentially comes to Egypt to purchase goods. So Jacob is in Canaan and they're experiencing a very bad famine. And so he tells his sons, go into Egypt so you can purchase food because they didn't have any there. So the brothers go into Egypt, and while they're there, they don't initially recognize that they're in fact buying food from Joseph, their younger brother, who they essentially sent into Egypt years before this. Long story short, there's a lot of detail that happens after this, and if you have not gotten the chance to read it, you totally should because it's really good. But Joseph eventually reveals to his brothers that he is alive and well and tells them to go back into Canaan and actually get their father and bring him back into the land to live.
Yeah, so we're now going to jump into chapter 46, and we're kind of going to do a summary of each chapter. So in chapter 46, God confirms what the brothers are telling to Jacob. The way he does that is actually through a vision, and he tells Jacob that his son will be there, and his son will actually be there to lay him to rest forever. And also, Jacob and Joseph reunite for the first time, and it's a super amazing and healing time in history in the Bible, because these two that were separated from each other essentially are now brought fully back together as a son and father.
Yeah. And then when we get to chapter 47, we initially see Joseph actually presenting his family to Pharaoh and letting him know, hey, my brothers and my father are here. And mind you, it wasn't like it was just a small group of about 15, 20 people that showed up to Egypt. All of Jacob's initial descendants were with him. So according to scripture, that's about 70 people, not including the wives of his sons. And so Pharaoh actually welcomes them with open arms and in fact tells Joseph to give his father and his family and his brothers the best land in Egypt. And then even goes forward to say, and if any of your brothers are really skilled, please put them over my flock to tend to them. So that's a huge deal because the blessing and the favor of God is definitely upon their life. And then to go a step forward, the famine is still happening, but Joseph is able to provide for all of his family members and make sure that they are completely fed. And I want to bring up the fact that this famine was so severe that it was saying in chapter 47 that people were in fact coming to buy food with money at a point. And when they ran out of money, they essentially came back to Joseph and said, we are completely out of money. We can't purchase food and we're going to die. Please allow Pharaoh to purchase all of our land and us as servants in exchange for food. And so that is what they ended up agreeing on moving forward. And so Pharaoh ends up in a position where he's ultimately the person who controls all of the land and has reduced all of the people down to servitude. I think that that's kind of like a good summary of 47. But I also want to say that at the end of it, Jacob gets to a point where he has been living in Egypt for 17 years now, and he is coming close to dying. And so he initially asks Joseph to promise him that when he dies, Joseph will take him out of Egypt to bury him where his fathers were buried versus leaving him in Egypt. And Joseph did, in fact, make that promise.
And now we'll make the transition to chapter 48.
So this part is actually pretty sweet because Joseph has two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Hopefully I didn't butcher their names, but if I did, don't judge me. And why I want to bring them up is because when Jacob is ill and he's dying, he tells Joseph, bring the sons to me, and he's going to bless them. Well, Jacob ends up taking his right hand and placing it on the younger son, Ephraim, and placing his left hand on the head of Manasseh, who is actually the older son. And Joseph notices that, and he's like, hey, no, Manasseh is the older son, and that's like the order that the blessing is supposed to go in. But Jacob, in fact, says, no, the younger son is going to ultimately have the more supreme blessing over his life. And when we read that, I thought that that was so interesting, because it is actually a common theme that we see up to this point, not just with these two boys, but we also see that with some of the other children that came before him. Like, for example, Abraham, he had Ishmael and Isaac, and ultimately Ishmael was the first son, but Isaac is the one who ended up getting blessed, and then it just keeps going and passing down generationally. And so ultimately, that is also something that we see show up in the New Testament, when Jesus basically just lets us know that the kingdom of God is not in correlation with what we think it's supposed to look like when it comes to firstborn, or just even serving, right? Like when we see that Jesus tells us like the first will, or the least will be the first, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to mention that really quick before we go into chapter 49.
Yeah, so chapter 49, we were talking about this as we were preparing it, and I really have an appreciation for Jacob's blessing. And as Kendra just mentioned, in chapter 48, Jacob actually does bless the two sons of Joseph. Mm-hmm. But now he actually moves on to bless his 12 sons. And I'm not going to read all 12 blessings, but in all of these blessings, you'll see what some would say positive blessings and some will be negative. But when you really read them and you notice what Jacob is actually doing, is he's actually giving a prophetic warning to the sons that maybe have not done all the right things consistently in their life. And he's giving a good prophetic word to those that have done well and have been following the Lord consistently. And so we actually see the love of Jacob for his other sons in those warnings, and I think it's a very worthy thing to look at in here. And there's one specific blessing that is really eye-opening. It's actually in chapter 49, verse 8. It says, Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. That part right there is actually a prophetic word about Jesus, and specifically, obviously, the Messiah. And I thought that was really beautiful how Jacob actually prophesies about the Messiah and about Jesus, the Christ, the one that we follow and talk to daily thousands of years ago. I think that's such a beautiful thing in chapter 49. And then we transition to Genesis chapter 50. And in this chapter, there isn't a whole lot that goes on. One specific thing that happens is the brothers of Joseph, they become fearful that Joseph is going to treat them bad now that Jacob has passed away. And this is something that they actually are fearful of because of what they have done to Joseph in the past. And so this is kind of that example of a past sin or a past mistake that has happened that is affecting a choice in the future.
Yeah, it ultimately sends them into this place of paranoia that, oh no, our father's dead, and Joseph is now going to start treating us poorly, which that actually is not the case. But I want to bring up a point that's actually pretty eye-opening, because Joseph initially forgives his brothers and whatnot, has them come move into the land, and after their father passes away, the brothers start scheming again, and they're like, hey, let's create a message and say that it's from our father to be presented to Joseph to say, forgive your brothers. That way Joseph would initially submit to that. However, again, that just shows not only did their previous sin put them in this state of paranoia, but now they're sinning again ultimately by coming up with some lie to ultimately protect themselves. And I do want to point out too that Jacob does in fact get taken to Canaan to go get buried with his fathers, but the life of Jacob, just seeing when he dies, it's pretty significant. Like, Egypt is mourning for 7 days, and there is a plethora, according to just research, they were saying about hundreds to maybe even thousands of people that actually escort Jacob out of Egypt to go bury him. So this was not something that's like, oh, this old guy just passed and like that's just Joseph's father. This was a huge deal to everyone that was amongst Jacob. So on that note, I hope that you guys do get a chance to go through and read 46 through 50 because it is so good. But we do ultimately want to close out with challenging you guys. We don't want this to be something that you just listen to, but like instead get a chance to actually reflect. And so Micah is going to kick us off with our first reflection question.
Yeah, this reflection question is kind of in direct correlation with Genesis chapter 49 and 50. And the question is, am I passing on faith and blessings to the next generation? And as you saw with Joseph, he is literally blessing not just the generation after him, but the ones after him. And we know that that blessing will continue going. And when he was blessing his children, even with the warnings, he was actually preparing his sons for what was to come from their past. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing in our day-to-day lives with the Lord to not just prepare us for the future, but to prepare our sons and our daughters for the future and their sons and daughters.
The next question is, what sin have we committed in the past that still has a hold or effect over us now because it has not been resolved? And why we're asking that is because, like we see with Joseph's brothers, ultimately they're experiencing this level of fear and paranoia because their past sin of what they did to their brother isn't fully resolved. And so saying that, I just want to encourage you to think about your own life, and maybe if there's an area where, yes, maybe you sinned against someone, or maybe you are in need of asking for an apology from someone, whatever it may be. Is there any sin that has gone on in your life that has caused you to have specific thoughts, or maybe live a certain way, or avoid certain people or areas and things of that nature? And the last question is tied to the fact that Joseph in chapter 50 ultimately tells his brothers that what you guys intended for my harm, God turned for my good. And that actually is such a huge point, because Joseph literally did get the opportunity to save lives of so many people because he was placed into Egypt. And while, yes, we can look back at the brothers and blame them for sending him into Egypt, ultimately this is a prime example of the fact that God is in control of all. And so the question is, what is something that has happened in your life that you classify as maybe bad, but maybe God is instead using it for a greater purpose? And I hope that you guys actually take time to reflect and think through these and allow the Lord to just minister to your heart.
Thank you guys so much. You guys have a great day or night, depending on when you're watching it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.